Hello and welcome back to Tell Me Your Ghost Story. I'm your host, Cassie Askin, and today we hear Sam's story and Steven's story. First, we hear Sam's story. Years ago, Sam found himself living in a dingy studio apartment, sharing the building with an eclectic mix of neighbors. One night, he woke up and spotted something impossible in his bathroom, an apparition whose presence would make horrifying sense the next morning. So without any further ado, let's hear Sam's story. Hey, Sam, tell me your ghost story.
About 20 years ago, my last 2 years at art school, I lived in the Arts Tower. It was an old hotel converted into dingy studio apartments behind the Doubletree Hotel on Broad Street in Philadelphia. This was the type of place where if they'd paint in between tenants, they'd paint right over change on the floor and dead flies on the windowsills. The place was peopled by elderly shut-ins, sex workers, and art students. My apartment was a studio efficiency to the truest sense. Single room with 2 windows, shallow closet, kitchenette with 1 cabinet, 2 burners over a sink and mini fridge. Bathroom, this will be important later, could have been out of Folsom Prison or a slaughterhouse. Chunky white subway tile, a toilet, sink, and a shower stall. No tub or door, just a tiled room with a ledge and a drain. In fact, you probably could have hung a side of beef in there. I had a futon, coffee table, drafting table, chair, and that's about it. Maybe a bookshelf or 2. Beyond being grimy and having colorful residents, the place was convenient and unremarkable. One morning, I wake up to a stench I can only describe as a mix of wet dog and rotting hamburger. I skip class and spend a few hours searching and sniffing every inch of my apartment, looking for a dead mouse or piece of food that may have rolled under the scant furniture and begun to rot. I find nothing. By the end of that week, I'd spent probably about $100 on scented candles, incense, Febreze, and other cleaning products. At some point during the second week of living with that smell, it had permeated the entire floor, and there was a maintenance man sprinkling carpet deodorizer the length of my hallway. I asked him what the hell that stench was. He only shrugged, continued on with his task. In my past, I have lived in some questionable places around people and animals with subpar hygiene. Stuff like that you kind of get used to. Nose blindness kicks in after a while. This, though, was not that. There was no escaping this miasma. I carried that smell on me all day, in my clothing. It just clung throughout the day. Towards the end of week 3, I wake up in the middle of the night needing the bathroom. The room is only lit by the ambient light flooding in from the Doubletree across the alley. From the threshold of my bathroom, in the gloom, I see a naked man sitting in my shower stall in the fetal position. I take 2 steps back, pinch myself to make sure I'm not dreaming. I pick up the heavy ceramic ashtray to potentially use as a weapon, and then swiftly walk into the bathroom and turn on the light. There's no one there. The next morning, they find my neighbor, dead from heart failure, who had been stewing in his bathtub the entire time. I was telling my grandfather this at a family function. He was a World War II medic, and upon completing my story, he gripped my knee, leaned in, and whispered, "And you will never forget that smell." Yeah, so the aforementioned grandfather I was telling that to, Pop Buck, he then regaled me with a few stories, but he had a neighbor who was a traveling salesman. Anytime this guy was on the road, he'd pop over, ask my grandfather to collect his mail and newspapers while he was gone. One summer day, my pop is mowing the lawn and notices his neighbor has a decent stack of newspapers on the front step and his mailbox is overflowing, but he hadn't asked the regular favor before leaving town. When he moves on to mowing the backyard, he smells a little smoke wafting over the fence and assumes the neighbor must have just gotten home and fired up the grill. As he's finishing mowing, there's visible black smoke. He looks over the fence. The neighbor has one of those super 70s all-glass sunrooms, and it's a black box of smoke. He runs over, smashes out a window with a patio chair, and as the smoke pours out, he sees his neighbor lying on a wicker settee. He, too, had died of heart failure while using a heating pad that had been on so long it short-circuited and melted halfway through his torso. My grandfather said, "Sam, I shit you not, it smelled like burning hot dogs." So his one ghost experience that he told me about, I had an aunt and uncle I wasn't too close with on my father's side, but they lived not far away on a dairy farm. As their health started to fail from old age, my grandfather would visit them weekly, help out around the house, have dinner, and finish the night playing cards. The entire time they lived there, they shared the house with a friendly poltergeist, for lack of a better word. All the standard stuff: chairs rocking, doors opening and closing, cabinets and drawers all open, loud boot steps, pretty standard fare. They had named him John at some point. My grandfather was aware, but had never experienced anything until one night while playing cards. The lights were occasionally flickering, and my aunt would jokingly say out loud, "Oh, John." I believe the game was some variation of rummy, where to start, 4 cards are turned. My grandfather starts to flip the first card from the deck, and the lights go out for a solid second or two and then come back on. The card is a Jack of Hearts. My aunt says, "Knock it off, John." The next card, the lights go off and on. Jack of Clubs. Again, the lights flicker. Jack of Diamonds. The 4th card, the lights go out and do not come back on until my uncle stands and turns them back on. Jack of Spades, all 4 jacks. My grandfather remarks, "I think your John is a jack." And that was the end of it for several years until both aunt and uncle passed away, and my grandfather was settling their affairs. He had to go to a rural town hall to find a property line before listing the farm. After a long wait, he's finally handed a small folder of paperwork concerning the land and the house, as well as an old newspaper clipping about a farmhand that had fallen face first into some sort of farm machinery and killed on the spot. His name was Jack. My grandfather said he jogged back to his car to make sure he hadn't shit his pants. A few years after my first ghost experience, I was out in the burbs. My friend John was house sitting for his brother. This was outskirts of Philadelphia. His brother lived in Hilltown. If you've never been, it's an odd area. You leave the strip malls of Montgomeryville, and within a mile, you're very quickly in hilly, sylvan countryside dotted with farmhouses, tractor barns, and a very old church and graveyard. The trees are cropped incredibly close to the road and hide the stars above like interlaced fingers. John had forgotten to feed his cat his last visit, so we were headed there at about 3 a.m. A gusty summer storm was whipping around the aforementioned trees on our drive, brushing the windows and windshield almost nonstop like we were driving through a car wash. I was staring ahead, white-knuckled, expecting the glass to crack, so the following was not glimpsed out the corner of my eye, but dead on. About halfway through this gauntlet of tree limbs, I saw dangling legs and feet hit and slide up the windshield and hear them across the roof of the car, as if we had driven under a gibbeted man. Without saying a word, John decreased speed to a few miles an hour, staring straight ahead, probably processing what he had also just witnessed. I just said, "Yup." John nodded, and we continued on without discussing what we had jointly seen. During high school, a friend and I got into photography. We made a habit of checking church doors around midnight because church sanctuaries make for some stunning photos on moonlit nights, and you'd be surprised how many leave their doors unlocked. One night we stuck in a Trinity Lutheran. This is in Lansdale, also outside of Philadelphia. I'm now a staunch atheist, but this was my childhood church. A massive classic sanctuary that was impressive regardless of the use. The only light was coming in through the stained glass windows, and the room was all yellow ambient light and shadows. We walked in, knelt on the padded ledge around the main pulpit to soak in the serenity of the hour before taking any photos. A few seconds into kneeling, I swore I heard whispering and looked behind me. A dozen pews back, sitting in the shadow of a column, was a person, undefinable in the dark, but clearly a person. And then even further beyond, in the overhanging balcony at the far back of the church, another person also sitting in shadow above us. I tapped my friend's leg and motioned with my eyes to look back. He did, went wide-eyed, and we walked out as casually as possible. No photos were taken that night.
Next, we hear Steven's story. Steven takes us inside the haunted tattoo shop where he used to work. What began as subtle disturbances like misplaced items and knocking on the walls soon escalated into a chilling encounter when the spirit of the building's former owner made her presence unmistakably known. So without any further ado, let's hear Steven's story. Hey, Steven, tell me your ghost story.
My ghost story starts about 3 years ago. I was a tattoo artist at a tattoo shop over near Long Beach. And what we heard was that there was a woman who was married to the owner of a jewelry store that was previously in the center, in the same store that the tattoo shop was at. Now, apparently, the wife of the jewelry store owner had died, and that was a potential of who the ghost was. The first thing that happened to me personally was that I was at the front looking back at the very long, like kind of hallway-ish shaped store. And as I was at the very front door, I turned around and I saw what looked like a woman duck down behind the counter. I went through the list of like, who could that be in my head? You know, your brain takes over logically, and I'm thinking, well, it's got to be Devin, who was one of the people that worked there. And then I'm thinking, wait a minute, she left for the day. Maybe not. I don't know. I gave it a minute. I just kind of waited. And then nobody popped up. And I thought, well, now I got to see who that was. And so I go look behind the counter, and there was nobody there. Now, some of the other small things that happened to people that weren't me personally were like the water would be on in the bathroom, turned on when nobody had been in there. I did hear the motion sensor go off quite often in there, but could have been a couple of things that could have caused that. So that was never a really big thing, but it was odd when the door was locked with no lights on that the motion sensor would go off and turn the lights and the fan on for some reason. So that was weird. Now, there was one instance that was very strange where there was a group of people that came in, and this is where it gets a little heavy, I would say. So there's a group of people that came in, and without saying too much, they were all related to someone who had recently passed on. And it was not a very nice and calm way of passing on, if that makes sense. She was young. She was a teenager. So they were all there to get tattoos memorializing this person. I start to get weird to talk about. So this machine that I have, it's a stencil machine that I use, and it's very common within the tattoo industry. It doesn't have very much frills to it. It's not a computer, but what it does is a carbon thermal printer. So it takes an image and it'll transfer it on like this carbon paper, and it just runs through like a machine. So as I was printing stencils, somebody else came to print a stencil, and her name printed instead of the stencil that they ran through. Now, these machines, they don't have the capability for memory. That's not like they have the ability to reprint. I can't go click print and it'll go back and it's just, there's no way I can do that. So it was really odd that her name came up, and that wasn't the only time that happened. Her name came up again another time later, and then from then on, our machine, no matter which one we put there, sometimes it would start to print things that wouldn't be run through. So I don't know if there's an explanation for that, because it works thermally on whatever you push through it. It kicks the image that is given. For some reason, instead of printing what it was supposed to, it generated an image on its own, which is not, it's not, like I said, it's not a computer. It's not supposed to do that. It doesn't have a button for that. It doesn't have a way to function in that way. It doesn't do that. So that was very weird that it did. I've had maybe 4 of those same printers and never had anything like that happen to me, ever. So after a couple of these weird things that happened, there was one girl who worked there, and she would get weirded out when I would talk about it. And so she would kind of shut it down. She'd be like, shut up, I don't want to hear it. Don't talk about it around me, blah, blah, blah. So one day I come in and she was real quiet, and she said, Steve, I got a story for you. And she said, I'm not going to tell you until my client leaves because I don't want to scare them. And I was like, all right, well, pull me aside when your appointment's done, So she said that she was at her station, and she's like tattooing like this with her head down with a client in front of her. And then out of the corner of her eye, her periphery, she sees someone go by her. Now, the tattoo shop being long how it was, there's only one entrance. And so she assumed someone came in the front. And she said that it was a woman. She saw like a dress or a shawl or like long hair, something identifiable as like a woman's body-ish looking coming by. And so then she said that she was so convinced that someone came in the shop, she asked her client, and she said, was there someone that just walked in? Because when she looked up, there was no one there. And they said, kind of looked at her like, are you crazy? Like, what? It's just you and me. There's no one else in the store. There's no one else, no other people tattooing. It was just them two. So they got weirded out by her. She got weirded out by the fact that she didn't even want to believe this stuff. And all of a sudden she's, saying, so then the day went on and somebody else shows up and she said that she realized, and she had this moment where it wasn't a person. She realized it wasn't a person that was walking by her, because when people walk, they have a bob. Their weight, as you take a step, your body dips down just a tiny bit. And that didn't happen with this person. It just moved by just like that. And she said that freaked her out, because it wasn't a weight. It was just a rush. And obviously the fact that there was no one there. Oh, one other thing that would happen, which was funny, was that stuff would fall off of shelves, or be relocated objects. I was there personally when a mirror fell off the wall. There was books stacked up perfectly on one of my coworkers' desks with her. She said, were you looking at my books? Because they were kind of lewd in nature. They had there were tattoo books. There's some naked people in them sometimes there. And so one of them was specifically sexual. And she was like, you were looking at my books, huh? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, what? I was like, yeah, I don't touch, I'm not touching your stuff. I don't go to other people's stations and touch their stuff. That's not what I do. And one of her books had been taken off the shelf and organized neatly, put together with a couple other objects off of the shelf onto her desk. After hours, nobody could explain it. So now, at that point, everybody was thoroughly freaked out and thought that there's got to be some sort of ghost here. I decided I was going to do a banishing. I was going to just talk out loud to whatever was there. And so I think I lit some sage and I walked around the whole shop, and then that was that. But after a few, I guess it might have even been 6 months to a year later after that, they broke a wall down and ended up expanding into the salon next door. And that is when stuff started getting weird again. I felt like there was something that was different. And so I started, saying goodbye and saying hello when I would show up, just to make sure I wasn't disrespecting something or anyone or anything. And there were several nights when that would happen. I would be all by myself and I felt like there was something else with me, or not necessarily watching me, but just that I wasn't there alone. Especially when you close in a place that's long like that, I would turn the lights off from the back and have to look at the front like a big black hallway. And then I'd be like, that's where I have to go. I have to walk down that hallway by myself. And there was a couple nights when I shut off the lights and see things or hear things on my way out. Now, I started to get more nervous about that. And I don't know if that played into it or not, but it came to a head when I was feeling like it was my time to leave that shop. I started having even weirder things happen. And so one night, I'm closing by myself. I went to the bathroom and I hear the front door chime. And I had a convenience store ding. It goes bling, bling when somebody walks in the door. Now, the front door was also, you could prop it open, and it was a big glass storefront. So there was windows, and the door was also a big window. And you could prop it open, and when you closed it, it made a big cracking noise. And so I hear the ding, I hear the bling, bling, and then I hear that cracking noise. And I think to myself, somebody's in the shop. Somebody opened the door, and they're inside. And the bathroom's all the way in the back. So I go out to the front, expecting to see someone. There's no one there. Now, mind you, as this place is a U shape, kind of like a big U like that, there could be someone on the other side and I can't see them. And the other side happens to be other stations and big chairs and stuff like that. So I start breaking down my station. It's about 8 o'clock at night. I start breaking down my station, and I don't think there was music playing at the time. I think when everybody leaves, I'll just shut it off. And so it was kind of silent, and I start hearing this scraping noise against the ground. And on the other side of the studio, we had these big metal chairs for people to sit in for piercing. It sounds like somebody's dragging one of these big chairs. And so I stopped, and I'm kind of like just listening, and I can hear it like metal across our concrete floor. And I'm thinking, that sounds weird. It sounds like it's inside. So I said, hello, and it stopped. And so I took a couple steps, and I'm just silent, standing alone. And then I hear it again, and it's louder, more vigorous, I should say. It sounds like someone's really pulling a chair. So then I walk towards the front, and I say, hello, and it stops, and I hear footsteps on the other side of the wall run towards the back. So now I'm freaked out. I think someone's here to rob me. That's my everything in my human body, all 6 of my senses are saying, I am getting robbed right now. Somebody's over on the other side. They're gonna do something, and I need to protect myself. So I run back to my station. I had a switchblade in there. I grab a knife, and I'm just ready. I'm like, okay, whatever happens, I'm just gonna defend myself or whatever. So then it's silent. And on the other side, there was an office that was closed in with the door. And there's also a private room that was closed in with the door. 2 areas where someone could potentially close themselves in. And so I'm thinking they're probably in there, or they ran out the back. So I make my way towards the front, and I go outside in the front, and it's all glass. And so I'm looking back in towards the shop, and there's nobody. There's nobody there. And so I call the owners, and they don't pick up. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I'm alone. I don't want to call the cops because it sounds crazy. I know I'm going to sound crazy. So I just say, you know what? Forget it. I'm just going to shut everything down. And I left. So then I get a call from the owner, and they saw I had a missed call, and they said, hey, so we noticed that all the lights are on. Everything looks pretty open. Can you please go back and shut it down? And I was freaked out. I said, okay, but before I do, I'm going to need you to look through the video. You tell me if anybody came in through that door. I want to know, because I did not feel alone. And so they checked the tapes, and they said, all I see is you running around the shop with the knife. You look like a crazy person. I don't see any other person but you. You're the only one there for the entire time, from when I was in the bathroom, whatever. So on one hand, I felt relieved that there wasn't somebody there when I was going to go back. On the other hand, I felt terrified, because that means, what was I hearing? So I go back, and I stay on my side, which was not the closed off station. And as I'm walking back, I start to hear knocking through the walls. I have no choice but to sprint to the back, shut the alarm on, or turn the alarm on, and then sprint back to the front and run out as fast as I can. And I just kind of, eyes closed, just did it. So then, fast forward to 1 week later to the day. It's one of my last closing shifts there ever at this shop. And I realize, as it's getting closer to the end of the day, that I'm going to be the only one here alone again, closing up again. So I said out loud, after the last person left, and it's just me, I said, all right, it's just me here. Don't mess with me today. Whatever it was that you got your fun out, like, don't do that again. And I figured if I said it out loud, that if it was a ghost, that it would work. I shut down the shop. No problems. Everything was fine. Now, as I'm locking the door, I'm standing directly in front of a glass door. It's like basically a big mirror. And the sides of the wall are also glass, also mirror. And it extends for maybe 15 feet total. As I'm locking the door, I look up, and I see my reflection directly in front of me. And to the right, directly right of me, I see a torso, and it looks like a blue skirt and like a waistband, some sort of white-ish like waistband, and then a blue skirt like coming out from the waistband. It didn't look like something or a garment that someone would wear today. It did not look like that. It looked old. There was legs underneath, like I could see legs coming out from the skirt. It was a long skirt. It wasn't like a short thing. The only time I've ever seen anything like that was somebody on like the Titanic. That kind of dress, you know what I mean? It was very, very elaborate, like extravagant. Not something someone would wear today. It was old. It seemed old, and it had a color to it that looked old, and it didn't look like a new dress or like something that was fashionable anytime recently. But I couldn't see like above. There was no head or shoulders or anything here. It was more like from right about the ribs down. The reason why it seemed like a reflection is because it was moving through objects that were in the space. Now then I think I'm getting robbed or somebody's going to break into here or something. So I kind of jump and look behind me and there's no one there. And there's nothing there. There's no car. There's nothing. It's just empty street, empty sidewalk, nothing. So I turned back, fully expecting what I just saw to be gone. And it's still there. And it's a torso, and it's still floating. And it goes straight through a desk and about a chair or two. As I'm looking at this thing, it's moving much in the way that my coworker had previously said. There was no weight to the movement. It was just like a float. It was like a glide, a very smooth glide. And then slowly, much like in a movie, there's no other way I can describe it, very, very slowly vanished directly in front of my own eyes. The door was locked. I was standing there outside. I mean, it kind of brings tears to my eyes. It's freaky. It's like I want to cry and throw up at the same time talking about it. It's weird. And so I go back to my car, and I just sat there for 10 minutes. I didn't know my brain could, that part that just kicks in that's supposed to say, well, it could have been this, or it could have been that, or it could be this. It didn't happen. There was nothing that explained. There was nothing I could explain. I didn't know what it was. That was the last time that I closed that place alone. And it was very close to the last time that I worked there. For me, it lined up. Now, when the girl said that, my other coworker, when she said that someone walked by, she also said they were wearing a long dress or like a long skirt. And when I first saw someone behind the desk of whatever that, it was a woman. And for me, there were times that as a human, I felt like, ooh, this is spooky, like it's dark and there could be a ghost, and so that freaked me out. But when there were moments of like the printer happening or water turning on when no one's in the room or the lights going off and on or stuff like that, I never felt threatened or like scared until that very last week when I started hearing the knocks in the walls and stuff moving around. But a bigger part of me, I never really felt like it was a demon, or like it was some sort of murderer who was trying to hurt me or something. It always felt like a woman, like there was like a feminine energy to this spirit that was, or if you want to call it that was there. And from what I understand, there was a painting of this woman that hung up in that place for a long time after she passed away. Now, I wasn't there when the business started. All these things I'm hearing are kind of hearsay, but I do know that we looked into it because of all the different occurrences. We had every single artist that worked at the shop had individually something happen to them while they were alone at the shop. And so after a while, it wasn't a joke anymore, or it wasn't like just me. And so we looked into it, and it was true because we just heard about it. Like it could have been some lady who passed away, and then we looked it up, and for sure, yeah, there was a jewelry store there before, and the wife had passed away before the husband, and they owned it for years. And once I think either the man passed away or he sold it, I don't know, but that the next business to move in was the tattoo shop.
Thank you so much to Sam and Steven for sharing their stories. Both Sam and Steven are artists. Sam is an illustrator and designer. If you're into spooky stuff, you've definitely seen his art before. And Steven is obviously a tattoo artist. I'll link both of their sites in the description. You've got to check them out. Please show your support of the show by rating and reviewing the podcast wherever you listen. It really makes a difference. Find photos from the show on Instagram at tellmeyourghoststorypodcast and find me on TikTok at tellmeyourghoststorypod. If you have a true paranormal story you'd like to share, please email it to tellmeyourghoststorypodcast at gmail.com. Until next time, my friends, good night to all, and to all a good night. Bye!